Hey everyone, it's Alex, and I am here finally with my video for the nominations for the 91st Academy Awards. This is always my favorite video to make every year. So the 91st Academy Awards are a couple days away on Sunday, February 24th, and like I do in all my videos, I'm going to go over all the nominations, just read through them, and then I'm going to go back and look at each category one by one and reveal what I like, what I don't like, and what I think got snubbed. So of course the Oscars, as you all know, honor various types of categories like acting, writing, directing, costume design, cinematography, etc., with the people in those fields getting those nominations and wins. Then there are certain types of films that get nominated, like animated films, foreign language films, documentary shorts, animated shorts, live action shorts, etc., and those nominations usually tend to go to the directors and producers of those films. And this year's Oscar ceremony, no matter what happens, is going to be very interesting because there have been many different wins from all the various guild groups and award shows, so there are a lot more wide open races this year than last year. And the ceremony itself will also be interesting due to the fact that this year there will be no host for the first time in 30 years. But I'll talk more about that and about all the behind-the-scenes stuff that's generated a lot of headlines in my review of the ceremony and winners. This is all just about the nominations. So without further ado, here are the nominations for the 91st Academy Awards. Best Art Direction, Black Panther, production design by Hannah Beachler, set decoration by Jay Hart. The Favorite, production design by Fiona Crombie, set decoration by Alice Felton. First Man, production design by Nathan Crowley, set decoration by Kathy Lucas. Mary Poppins Returns, production design by John Meyer, no relation to me, by the way, because our names are spelled very differently. My last name is spelled M-E-Y-E-R, and this John Meyer's last name is spelled M-Y-H-R-E. Set decoration by Gordon Sim. Roma, production design by Eugenio Caballero, set decoration by Barbara Enriquez. Best Cinematography, Lukasz Zal, Cold War. Robbie Ryan, The Favorite. Caleb Deschanel, Never Look Away. Alfonso Cuarón, Roma. Matthew Libatique, A Star is Born. Best Costume Design, Mary Zophres, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Ruth Carter, Black Panther. Sandy Powell, The Favorite. Sandy Powell, Mary Poppins Returns. Alexandra Byrne, Mary Queen of Scots. Best Film Editing, Barry Alexander Brown, Black Klansman. John Ottman, Bohemian Rhapsody. Yorgos Mavropsaridis, The Favorite. Patrick J. Don Vito, Green Book. Hank Corwin, Vice. Best Makeup and Hairstyling, Goran Lundstrom and Pamela Goldamer, Order. Jenny Shirkor, Mark Pilcher, and Jessica Brooks, Mary Queen of Scots. Greg Canham, Kate Biscoe, and Patricia Dehaney, Vice. Best Original Score, Ludwig Göransson, Black Panther. Terrence Blanchard, Black Klansman. Nicholas Britell, If Beale Street Could Talk. Alexander Desplat, Isle of Dogs. Mark Shaman, Mary Poppins Returns. Best Original Song, All the Stars from Black Panther. Music and lyrics by Kendrick Lamar, Mark Spears, Anthony Tippett, and SZA. I'll Fight from RBG. Music and lyrics by Diane Warren. The Place Where Lost Things Go from Mary Poppins Returns. Music by Mark Shaman, lyrics by Scott Whitman and Mark Shaman. Shallow from A Star is Born. Music and lyrics by Lady Gaga, Mark Ronson, Anthony Rossimondo, and Andrew Wyatt. When a Cowboy Trades His Spurs for Wings from The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Music and lyrics by David Rawlings and Gillian Welch. Best Sound Editing, Benjamin A. Burt and Steve Bodeker, Black Panther. John Warhurst and Nina Hartstone, Bohemian Rhapsody. Eiling Lee and Mildred Iatru Morgan, First Man. Ethan Van der Rijn and Eric Adol, A Quiet Place. Sergio Diaz and Skip Levsey, Roma. Best Sound Mixing. Steve Bodeker, Brandon Proctor, and Peter Devlin, Black Panther. Paul Massey, Tim Cavagen, and John Casali, Bohemian Rhapsody. John Taylor, Frank A. Montano, Eiling Lee, and Mary H. Ellis, First Man. Skip Levsey, Craig Hennigan, and Jose Antonio Garcia, Roma. Tom Ozanich, Dean Zupanchik, Jason Reuter, and Steve Morrow, A Star is Born. Best Visual Effects. Dan DeLue, Kelly Port, Russell Earl, and Dan Sudik, Avengers Infinity War. Christopher Lawrence, Michael Eames, Theo Jones, and Chris Corbould, Christopher Robin. Paul Lambert, Ian Hunter, Tristan Miles, and J.D. Schwalm, First Man. Roger Guyett, Grady Kofer, Matthew E. Butler, and David Shirk, Ready Player One. Rob Brito, Patrick Tubach, Neil Scanlon, and Dominic Toohey, Solo, A Star Wars Story. Best Animated Short Film. Animal Behavior, Allison Snowden and David Fine. Bao, Domi Shi and Becky Neiman Cobb. Late Afternoon, Louise Bagnall and Nuria Gonzalez Blanco. One Small Step, Andrew Chesworth and Bobby Pontius. Weekends, Trevor Jimenez. Best Live Action Short Film. Detainment, Vincent Lam and Darren Mahone. Fauve, Jeremy Compte and Maria Gracia Turgeon. Marguerite, Marianne Farley and Marie-Helene Panacé. Mother, Rodrigo Sorogoyen and Maria Del Puy Alvarado. Skin, Guy Nativ and Jamie Ray Newman. Best Documentary Short Subject. Black Sheep, Ed Perkins and Jonathan Chin. Endgame, Rob Epstein and Jeffrey Friedman. Lifeboat, Sky Fitzgerald and Bryn Mooser. A Night at the Garden, Marshall Curry. Period, End of Sentence, Reka Zeptopchi and Melissa Burton. Best Documentary Feature. Free Solo, Elizabeth Chai Vasarhelyi, Jimmy Chin, Evan Hayes, and Shannon Dill. Hale County This Morning, This Evening, Ramel Ross, Jocelyn Barnes, and Sue Kim. Minding the Gap, Bing Liu and Diane Kwan. Of Fathers and Sons, Talal Durkee, Ansgar Frerich, Ava Keme, and Tobias N. Siebert. RBG, Betsy West and Julie Cohen. Best Foreign Language Film. Capernaum from Lebanon, directed by Nadine Labaki. Cold War from Poland, directed by Paweł Polakowski. Never Look Away from Germany, directed by Florian Henkel von Donnersmarck. Roma from Mexico, directed by Alfonso Cuarón. Shoplifters from Japan, directed by Hirokazu Koreeda. Best Animated Feature. Incredibles 2, Brad Bird, John Walker, and Nicole Paradis Grindle. Isle of Dogs, Wes Anderson, Scott Rudin, Stephen Rails, and Jeremy Dawson. Mirai, Mamoru Hosoda and Yuichiro Saito. Ralph Breaks the Internet, Rich Moore, Phil Johnston, and Clark Spencer. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Bob Persichetti, Peter Ramsey, Rodney Rothman, Phil Lord, and Christopher Miller. Best Original Screenplay. Deborah Davis and Tony McNamara, The Favorite. Paul Schrader, First Reformed. Nick Vallelonga, Brian Curry, and Peter Farrelly, Green Book. Alfonso Cuarón, Roma. Adam McKay, Vice. Best Adapted Screenplay. Joel Cohen and Ethan Cohen, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, based on stories by Jack London and Stuart Edward White. Charlie Wachtel, David Rabinowitz, Kevin Wilmot, and Spike Lee, Black Klansman, based on the book by Ron Stallworth. Nicole Holofcener and Jeff Whitty, Can You Ever Forgive Me, based on the book by Lee Israel. Barry Jenkins, If Beale Street Could Talk, based on the novel by James Baldwin. Eric Roth, Bradley Cooper, and Will Fetters, A Star is Born, based on the 1937 screenplay by William A. Wellman and Robert Carson, the 1954 screenplay by Moss Hart, and the 1976 screenplay by John Gregory Dunn, Joan Didion, and Frank Pearson. Best Supporting Actor: Mahershala Ali, Green Book; Adam Driver, Black Klansman; Sam Elliott, A Star is Born; Richard E. Grant, Can You Ever Forgive Me; Sam Rockwell, Vice. Best Supporting Actress: Amy Adams, Vice; Marina de Tavira, Roma; Regina King, If Beale Street Could Talk; Emma Stone, The Favorite; Rachel Weisz, The Favorite. Best Actor: Christian Bale, Vice; Bradley Cooper, A Star is Born; Willem Dafoe, At Eternity's Gate; Rami Malek, Bohemian Rhapsody; Viggo Mortensen, Green Book. Best Actress: Yalitza Aparicio, Roma; Glenn Close, The Wife; Olivia Colman, The Favorite; Lady Gaga, A Star is Born; Melissa McCarthy, Can You Ever Forgive Me. Best Director: Spike Lee, Black Klansman; Powell Polakowski, Cold War; Yorgos Lanthimos, The Favorite; Alfonso Cuarón, Roma; Adam McKay, Vice. And finally, Best Picture. There can be anywhere from 5 to 10 nominees in this category. This year there are 8. So the 8 Best Picture nominees for 2018 are Black Panther, Kevin Feige, producer; Black Klansman, Sean McKittrick, Jason Blum, Raymond Mansfield, Jordan Peele, and Spike Lee, producers; Bohemian Rhapsody, Graham King, producer; The Favorite, Cece Dempsey, Ed Guiney, Lee Majideh, and Yorgos Lanthimos, producers; Green Book, Jim Burke, Charles B. Wessler, Brian Curry, Peter Farrelly, and Nick Vallelonga, producers; Roma, Gabriela Rodriguez and Alfonso Cuarón, producers; A Star is Born, Bill Gerber, Bradley Cooper, and Lynette Howell-Taylor, producers; Vice, Dee Dee Gardner, Jeremy Kleiner, Adam McKay, and Kevin Messick, producers. And those are the nominations for the 91st Academy Awards. Now, before I get into my thoughts about the nominations, I just want to give recognition to a lot of historical firsts that took place in these nominations this year. Hannah Beachler, the production designer for Black Panther, is the very first African-American nominee for Best Art Direction, I believe, ever. Peter Ramsey is the first African-American ever nominated for a Best Animated Feature Oscar. Yalitza Aparicio is the first ever Indigenous Mexican woman nominated for Best Actress, because while she may not be the very first Mexican nominee in the category, she's the very first nominee to not have European ancestry. Domi Shi, who's nominated for Best Animated Short Film for Bao, she's the very first woman to ever direct a Pixar short film, and now as a result she's the very first woman to be nominated for one. And in terms of diversity, she's also representing Asian filmmakers, because not a lot of Asian actors or filmmakers get Oscar nominations, but this year there are quite a number of them, especially in the documentary category, where I believe at least 3 out of the 5 nominees have Asian filmmakers nominated there. And Mark Shaman, while he's not history-making in terms of first nominations or representation or anything like that, he would make history if he were to win either of his nominations by becoming the 16th person to join the exclusive EGOT club of people who've won all 4 of the major entertainment awards: Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, Tony. Last year, 3 new people joined with John Legend, Andrew Lloyd Webber, and Tim Rice when they won Emmys for Jesus Christ Superstar Live in Concert. So all Marc Shaiman has to do is win an Oscar to complete that. Will he actually win? I don't know, but we'll see. And then, of course, last but certainly not least of historic milestones is, of course, Black Panther being the first comic book movie or superhero movie, whatever you want to call it, to get nominated for Best Picture, because ever since The Dark Knight infamously failed to get a Best Picture nomination in 2008, despite being one of the most critically acclaimed and highest-grossing films of that year, there's been an outcry by many critics and fans for at least one superhero film of some kind to get into the top category. And while Black Panther didn't get into any other big categories like acting, writing, or directing, it still got 7 nominations overall, which thus makes it the most nominated superhero/comic book film since The Dark Knight. So, even though comic book movies aren't necessarily my favorite type of movies, I don't hate them, but I don't feel the need to always watch them, it's still worth congratulating Black Panther for that nonetheless. Alright, so now on to my actual thoughts about the nominations. For Best Art Direction, so I finally did watch Black Panther because of these nominations, just so that I could properly comment on it in all these nominations. And the art direction is pretty impressive looking. I don't know how much of it was real and how much was CGI, but I mean, if it looks like a lot of it had to have been real. If it was primarily CGI, I don't think it would have been nominated here. It looks quite impressive, and the Oscars have often nominated science fiction sets in addition to like period historical sets. The Favorite looked absolutely beautiful with its 18th century setting, just very lavish and gorgeous and just really capturing the time period. And given that royalty are the main characters, you would expect it to look very lavish. First Man does an excellent job of recreating the look of the 1960s, especially with the look of NASA. Mary Poppins Returns, very fabulous recreation of 1930s London, and it does an excellent job of recreating the old neighborhood scene in the original Mary Poppins film, because it's still set in that neighborhood and still set in the very same house. And while there might be like some changes to the interior of the house, as you would expect after several decades, it still, from the outside and everywhere else, looks very much the same, which is especially amazing considering that the original film was shot in a studio in Los Angeles and this was shot over in London. And then Roma does a very good job of recreating 1970s Mexico City, and it looks very realistic, and it's shot in black and white. So these are all solid nominations. I can't really think of any I would take out and replace it with something else. But in terms of other films that would have been also worthy of recognition, Bad Times at the El Royale did a fantastic job of recreating the late 1960s with its hotel setting. That would have been one film I would have liked to have seen nominated here, but again, I don't know what I would take out to replace it with. And then some other quick shout-outs: Hereditary. Most films set in the modern day don't really stand out with art direction, but this one does, especially when they create like kind of a dollhouse-like setting. If you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. On Chesil Beach, also set in the 1960s, had some great art direction. Crazy Rich Asians, it's set in a very lavish, rich environment, even though it's set in the modern day, but it does a good job of showcasing that environment. And then Black Klansman does a very good job showcasing the 1970s in Colorado Springs. So for Best Cinematography, Cold War was shot in black and white, and it looks very beautiful, and it's very stunning. Although I don't know if it was my favorite of the nominees, because there are some films I do think were snubbed here. The Favorite absolutely looks incredible. It has a very natural light look to it. I don't know if that was the case, but it certainly looks like it was, because a lot of the shots look like they're just lit only by the natural sunlight outside or by candlelight if the scene takes place at night. Haven't seen Never Look Away, but Caleb Deschanel, he's a very well-known cinematographer. This is his 6th nomination, and he actually happens to be the father of actresses Emily and Zooey Deschanel. Alfonso Cuarón for Roma, of course, that was going to be in here, and it absolutely deserves to be in here. Just looks absolutely stunning the way it was shot in black and white. Even if it had been shot in color, I'm sure it would have still looked absolutely stunning. But there's just something about the way in which this film was captured. It just looks absolutely incredible. And considering that Alfonso Cuarón took over cinematography duties himself, rather than like his usual collaborator, Emmanuel Lubezki, who I believe had a scheduling conflict that prevented him from working on Roma. It looks like he's a master who's been doing it for 30 years. And then A Star is Born. I like that pick here. It's shot very well, especially with the concert scenes, many of which were filmed live. So I like at least 3 of these 5 nominees, with The Favorite, Roma, and A Star is Born. With Cold War and Never Look Away, if I could replace them with any nominees, I'd replace them with one of these. First Man, that film had stunning cinematography, whether it was the NASA training scenes or the moon landing itself. At Eternity's Gate had a lot of beautiful colors, especially when Vincent van Gogh is working in fields or forests doing his paintings, and the way it utilizes shaky cam and blurriness to highlight Vincent van Gogh's mental decline. It was just something like I'd never seen before. On Chesil Beach had some stunning cinematography, especially on the scenes at the actual beach, which are some of the most climactic moments of the film. Hereditary had some great cinematography, even if a lot of it was in very dark rooms. It still looked great on screen. And then A Quiet Place. That film utilized both darkness and light to help elevate the mood and atmosphere of the film. So any one of those 5 nominees, I think, would have been better off being nominated over Cold War or Never Look Away. For Best Costume Design, there aren't really a lot of many Western movies anymore, so seeing a movie like The Ballad of Buster Scruggs in here is a little nice refresher, because then you're not just having the same old lavish royal period costumes. Here you got the 19th century Western style, and they look really well. Black Panther, you don't really see like a lot of sci-fi costumes or fantasy costumes in here, but the costumes here work very well, especially with the African tribal designs that Ruth Carter used. The Favorite and Mary Poppins Returns, since they're both done by the same costume designer, Sandy Powell, they both look magnificent considering how very different they are, with The Favorite being very lavish and its royalty wearing these costumes in its early 18th century. Mary Poppins Returns is a little more modern, obviously, with 1930s, so you have those types of costumes, but they both work very well. And Mary Queen of Scots also does royalty very well, only this time it's the 16th century, so it's about 200, well, maybe not exactly 200, but maybe roughly around 150 years before the events of The Favorite. But those period costumes look very well. All these nominees are pretty solid. The only film I can really say was snubbed here was Crazy Rich Asians. And while films set in the modern day don't usually get nominated here, once in a while when they do showcase a lot of like lavish gowns and tuxedos in films like, say, The Devil Wears Prada or La La Land, they do tend to get nominated here. And while Crazy Rich Asians wasn't the absolute best film of 2018, one thing it really succeeded with was its costume design. Best film editing. I'm very happy to see Black Klansman in here, because that was my favorite film of last year, and the way that film is edited to include not only the events of the film leading up to very tense moments, but also including footage from everything from films like Gone with the Wind and The Birth of a Nation to the very end of the film where they showcase the Charlottesville rallies of 2017. And all of this is done to highlight the history of the Ku Klux Klan and why they're still very dangerous even to this day. It holds the film together very well and never makes the film boring for a single second. Bohemian Rhapsody, its editing was solid, but I wouldn't say worthy of a nomination. I realized that the editor, John Ottman, was in quite a bind when Bryan Singer got fired and was replaced by Dexter Fletcher, so he had to pretty much save the film in order to make sure it was released into theaters. So to me, this seems kind of more like a sympathy nomination rather than a genuine nomination. And even though it did win the Editors Guild Award, I'm not so sure if it'll win the Oscar itself. Maybe it could, but given that Bohemian Rhapsody has had a very mixed reaction from some who really love it and others who really hate it, its win is not guaranteed, is what I'm basically trying to say. And while its editing was good, I've seen many other films that were far better in terms of editing. The Favorite had some great editing, and the film is literally divided into chapters, and I think they're all held together very well. Green Book, its editing was okay, but nothing special like Bohemian Rhapsody. And Vice, the editing was pretty good, and especially since they use a lot of interesting footage in some cases, which seems out of place, but then kind of makes sense as the film goes on. If you've seen Vice, then you'll know what I'm talking about. But it's not necessarily the best editing of last year. So with BlacKkKlansman and The Favorite, I'm really glad they're in here. But with the other three, I can think of a lot of films I think were far better. Roma, for instance, should have been in here because it's a slow burner film, and those films, if they don't have great editing, they fall apart quickly. And I was never bored watching Roma despite its slow burn. A Star is Born should have been in here because how they edit the concert scenes and then everything in between, that was spectacular to see. A Quiet Place, that film was very tense and tight throughout its whole 90 minutes or so runtime, and I was on the edge of my seat from beginning to end. And horror films are often made or broken by their editing, and A Quiet Place has certainly helped very much by its editing. First Man, everyone's shocked that that's not nominated here because that film was nearly 2.5 hours, and space movies are often frequently nominated in this category. And it's, again, held together. It creates a cohesive story out of segments that, if not edited together properly, could have fallen apart, since it rotates between NASA and Neil Armstrong's home life and back and forth until the actual moon landing itself. That kind of going back and forth can fall apart without great editing. Searching, it didn't necessarily make my top 15 list, but it was in my honorable mentions. And given that that film is set entirely on a computer screen and deals with like social media and email accounts, and given that most films like that usually are bad, but this one is finally good. How it was edited, I don't know how they managed to do it, but it looked spectacular. Bad Times at the El Royale, while its third act might not be as strong as its first two acts, I blame that more on the writing than the editing, though. But the editing itself I thought was magnificent, especially how they tried to string all the various characters' stories together, since they're all these people with separate stories who come together at this one place. It's very similar to Pulp Fiction, but it doesn't rip off Pulp Fiction. And then finally, Widows. I thought Widows was a very well-edited film, especially in the final act when the heist sequence itself takes place. So yeah, any of those I think would have been better off being nominated than Bohemian Rhapsody, Green Book, or Vice. Trying to pick between them, I'd probably pick some of my top four of Roma, A Star is Born, A Quiet Place, and First Man. Which one of those I'd eliminate to make it 3, I honestly don't know, and I'm not going to decide right now because obviously the nominations can't be changed, but if I were to change them, they would be some of the contenders I would pick. For Best Makeup and Hairstyling, I still don't understand why there's only 3 nominees here and why they don't just go to 5, but I've talked about that in other videos, so I'm not really going to rehash it here. Border, I've not seen. I know it was Sweden's entry for Best Foreign Language Film, but that film failed to make the semi-finalist list, in that category at least. Mary, Queen of Scots, that had excellent makeup, especially with showcasing Queen Elizabeth I's smallpox. And then Vice, of course, that would be in here. If it wasn't in here, everyone would be outraged because how they transformed all the people, especially Christian Bale into Dick Cheney. I mean, it was wow. As for snubs out of the contenders that they did have eligible, Suspiria, I think, was robbed of a nomination here because whether you loved or hated that film, you can't deny some of the amazing prosthetics that were used, particularly in transforming Tilda Swinton into an old man. Stan and Ollie, I believe, was eligible as well, but that didn't make the cut. But I thought the makeup, at least with John C. Reilly, looked really well. Black Panther also had some really good makeup. That was eligible as well. And then I really wish The Favorite had been eligible. I don't know why it wasn't. But even though there's not really a lot of prosthetic makeup in that movie, there still is like a lot of rouge makeup and things like that used on the royal characters. So for Best Original Score, Black Panther's score was good, but I'm not really going to remember it for days to come. BlacKkKlansman had a pretty solid score, but admittedly it's not the most memorable score I've ever heard. If Beale Street Could Talk, easily the best score of last year. The score itself literally feels like its own separate character in the movie, and that's often what, to me, makes some of the best musical scores the best, is when the score itself feels like its own character, and like there's a lot of emotional swelling in the key moments as part of it. Isle of Dogs, I'm very happy to see that in here. That had an amazing score, and it's done by my second favorite film composer of all time, Alexander Desplat. And then Mary Poppins Returns, that had a very nice score. Maybe not as great as the original Mary Poppins score from 1964 by Richard and Robert Sherman, but still, it'd be hard for any film to compete with a score like that. But this comes pretty close. As for snubs, Widows I would have liked to have seen nominated here, especially because it's a Hans Zimmer score, and when it gets near the end it really pumps up. Suspiria, that had an incredible score, and that score was done by Radiohead frontman Thom Yorke, and I really love Radiohead. They're among my favorite bands of all time. And then of course First Man, which everyone expected to be here and maybe even win, but sadly it's not here. For Best Original Song, pretty solid list, I guess, from the songs that were declared eligible. And I've heard all of them from their movies. They're all relatively good. All the Stars, I'll Fight, The Place Where Lost Things Go, When a Cowboy Trades His Spurs for Wings. They're solid, although I wouldn't say they're absolutely amazing. But then, of course, there's Shallow, which is an amazing song. And I did talk about in my video on the original contenders how I wish they had made other songs from A Star Is Born eligible, like I'll Never Love Again, or Requiem from a Private War. I wish that had been eligible. Sunflower from Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, I wish that had been eligible, because I haven't really liked many Post Malone songs, but this one actually surprised me on how well I liked it, and I thought it was incorporated into the movie very well. For Best Sound Editing, very solid list. Black Panther, had a great sound. Bohemian Rhapsody, while I thought the film was just decent, not great, the sound was spectacular, especially with the Live Aid sequence, which I imagine is the big reason why it's nominated here, and it rightfully deserves a nomination for that. First Man, of course, that would be in here. Space movies are very popular with the Academy in this category, and rightfully so, because it captures the sound of space very well. A Quiet Place, I know I wish A Quiet Place had more nominations overall, but I'm glad at least it's nominated here, because this movie has to rely on not only the sound of the aliens, but also on the fact that for a good chunk of the movie there is no sound. And while that seems extremely ironic, and it kind of is, it still adds to the tension of the movie. And then Roma, you might not think that's a typical film to be in a category like this, but when it gets to certain moments, and I'm sure those of you who've seen the film know what moments those are, I'm not going to say them to avoid spoilers. You'll see why it deserves a nomination here. And then Best Sound Mixing, pretty much the same nominees, all deserving, although except in this case we have A Star Is Born nominated here in sound mixing over A Quiet Place. And A Star Is Born is deserving of its nomination here because, it's a music film, and music films tend to get nominated here along with like science fiction or war films or all the other films that are typically nominated for the sound categories. So I don't really have too many complaints about this. As for like shout-outs of some films I would have liked to have seen, I do wish A Quiet Place could have also gotten into sound mixing, and A Star Is Born also gotten into sound editing. As for films that I wish could have gotten into both, Hereditary had great sound, Suspiria had great sound, BlacKkKlansman had great sound. although I'll admit it, I'm not sure what I would take out to replace with those. Now for best visual effects. Well, of course, Avengers Infinity War, even though I didn't see it, I'm not surprised it's nominated here. Christopher Robin, I wasn't sure if that would get the nomination or not, but I am glad it did because of how they incorporated the Winnie the Pooh characters into the real world. They're not depicted as like the hand-drawn 2D animated version we're used to seeing from Disney. They're depicted as actual stuffed animals, and that could have gone really bad, but it didn't. First Man, of course, that's in here, and rightfully so. It's a space movie, and it looks very realistic, and I hear they use like a lot of old school practical techniques as well as CGI. Ready Player One, you know, if that wasn't in here, I'd be very upset, because it's one of the best looking video game movies I've ever seen. A good chunk of it is set inside this video game world, and it's Steven Spielberg, so he's going to use as much money as he can to make it look as dazzling as it needs to be. And Solo, a Star Wars story, I know it technically is a bomb by Star Wars standards, and I know people are very mixed about it. I liked it, although it's not an amazing film per se, but the visual effects, especially during the Kessel Run sequence, are spectacular. As for snubs, I wish Mary Poppins Returns could have been in here, because I thought it combined live action and 2D animation very well. And then Welcome to Marwen. I know that film's been an epic critical and financial bomb. I think it's underrated, but I thought how they made these dolls come to life for a good segment of the film, I thought was done very well, and Robert Zemeckis, he knows how to do great visual effects. For Best Animated Short Film, I have seen all of these, and I really like all of them, with Weekends being the best one in my opinion, followed by One Small Step, Bow, Animal Behavior, and Late Afternoon. But I'm not going to discuss the short films in too much detail because I'm still working my way through them at my local theater. So I still have to see the live action and documentary shorts, which I'm going to be seeing in the next few days. For Best Documentary Feature, I'm still working my way through these. I have seen Free Solo. Very good film, maybe not the most in-depth documentary since it's just about a guy trying to climb El Capitan at Yosemite free solo, you know, without any safety gear, so there's no like in-depth analysis or anything. But the cinematography in this movie is stunning. You know, the filmmakers compared it to a Mission Impossible movie, and I can see why, because you wonder how the hell did they pull off a shot like that as he's climbing the mountainside. RBG I did see. It was a fantastic documentary. You know, it was kind of like your traditional bio documentary with interviews and montages and things like that, but it's an amazing portrait of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and it was in my top 15 best films of last year. I just recently watched Of Fathers and Sons. It's interesting in how it looks at a radical Islamic family, because the filmmaker went undercover to explore this family, but it's kind of just like random footage stitched together. There's not really any cohesive theme or idea stuck to it. So it's not the best nominee in this category, and then the other two, Hale County This Morning, This Evening, and Minding the Gap, I did not see yet. For Best Foreign Language Film, I've seen 3 of the 5. Cold War, good film, but I think it could have used a little more plot to it, a little more character development. Roma, fantastic film. I've gone on and on about it in my Best Films of 2018 video, so I'm not really going to say anything too much here, but it was an incredible experience to watch. And then Shoplifters, I did see that, and of course last year it won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. It's a good film, but I think it's a little too slow-paced at times, and I wish there was like more background to the characters. But Roma is probably going to easily win this, and rightfully so. For Best Animated Feature, Incredibles 2 is really great. You know, I think it's almost on par with the first Incredibles. I'd still give them both the same grades, but I do think the first one is a little better, but this was a sequel that was easily worth the 14-year wait. Isle of Dogs, really solid film. There were a few characters I didn't like Greta Gerwig's character, who was really annoying, but the rest of the cast, especially the dogs, were fantastic. The main boy and his dog was very touching. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. While it's not my favorite animated film of last year like it is for many others, I did really enjoy it. And I didn't get to see Mirai because it didn't come out in my area, and then Ralph Breaks the Internet. I meant to see it but wasn't able to because of family circumstances, and I just didn't have the time or desire to go back to see it afterwards. And there's not really any snubs in this category that I can think of, because the only other animated films I really saw were just either okay or just meh, like Smallfoot and The Grinch. So at least there's no outrage nominee like, say, The Boss Baby last year. And then for Best Original Screenplay, The Favorite, fantastic screenplay, great witty dialogue, First Reformed. Although I didn't like the very last 30 seconds of the movie, everything up to that point was really great, especially with the writing and the performances. And believe it or not, this is Paul Schrader's very first Oscar nomination ever. He's one of the most iconic screenwriters of all time. He's written films like Taxi Driver and Raging Bull, but he's never gotten an Oscar nomination until now. Green Book, its screenplay was fine, but not necessarily great. Roma, fantastic screenplay, and Vice, even if it wasn't the most perfect film, it had a very solid screenplay. In terms of Green Book, there are many films I would have liked to have seen be nominated over that. Eighth Grade, I think, was a far more worthy screenplay, and it even just won the Writers Guild Award, despite not being nominated here. But that's one of the best coming-of-age films I've seen this decade, and although I hadn't been familiar with Bo Burnham's work before then, because I've never watched his stand-up, and I've only seen like one clip he's done in recent weeks, at least from some of his old stuff, but I'm very curious to see what he does for movies in the near future. A Quiet Place would have been a great nomination here, especially considering how a lot of it involves no dialogue. Still, you have to use a screenplay to set up the scenes, and it still works fantastic in my opinion. Sorry to Bother You had a fantastic original screenplay. So did Bad Times at the El Royale, Searching, and At Eternity's Gate. All of those had great original premises or had original takes on a person's life. Just all of them were better films in my opinion than Green Book. Now, I don't hate Green Book if that's what you're thinking, but I wouldn't say it's among the absolute best movies of last year, though. These films, in my opinion, are better, in part because of the writing. And as for adapted screenplay, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, it's strong in some parts, but weak in others with its writing, because this is like an anthology movie of 6 separate stories that don't really have a connection, except that they take place in the Old West. And in my opinion, it's one of the Coen brothers' weaker films. Not a bad film, but nowhere near as great as a film like, say, Fargo. BlacKkKlansman, that had an amazing screenplay. Same with Can You Ever Forgive Me, also an amazing screenplay. A lot of strong dialogue, both serious and funny at times, too. And it contributes a lot to the great performances and direction. If Beale Street Could Talk, Barry Jenkins is 2 for 2 in terms of great adapted screenplays. Moonlight was a fantastic screenplay, and this is a great screenplay, and I read James Baldwin's novel, and I'd say at least 90 to 95% of the novel is in the movie. So, great job there, Barry Jenkins. And then A Star is Born. I was very hesitant about this film of whether or not it even needed to be made again, and admittedly I hadn't seen any of the other versions before seeing this, but I was just wondering what else could they possibly do. But thankfully, in my opinion, it's actually the best version of A Star is Born to date. And, you know, Eric Roth in particular is a great screenwriter with films like Forrest Gump and The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. So I think he probably, out of all the 3 nominees for that screenplay, probably contributed the most, I would imagine. But no matter who contributed what, it's a fantastic screenplay, and pretty much all these screenplays are rightfully deserving of their nominations, maybe except for Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Some other screenplays better than that one are Boy Erased had a fantastic screenplay, On Chesil Beach had a fantastic screenplay, written by the author of the original novel, Ian McEwan, Widows had a great screenplay. I wish that had gotten more love for it. Leave No Trace had a great screenplay. The Hate U Give, probably one of the best written young adult movies ever made. And rest in peace, Audrey Wells, the writer of that film, who tragically died right as the film was being released in theaters. And First Man, I thought, also had a great adapted screenplay. All of these screenplays, in my opinion, would have been better than The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. And then for Best Supporting Actor, Mahershala Ali, he's really great in Green Book, the best thing about that movie. Adam Driver, really great in BlacKkKlansman. He and John David Washington have fantastic chemistry. Sam Elliott, he's really good in A Star is Born, although there are large chunks of the film where he's not even there, and he maybe only has 15 minutes of screen time. So he's not my pick to win, but, and I don't know if I would have nominated him if I were an Oscar voter myself, but I'm not going to be mad about the nomination. Richard E. Grant, he's fantastic in Can You Ever Forgive Me? He and Melissa McCarthy have this great toxic chemistry together since they're both alcoholics who do these bad things together. And then Sam Rockwell, while he was good as George W. Bush, he only has 5 to 10 minutes of screen time, and in my opinion, his character wasn't developed enough to warrant a nomination here. So, some snubs in this category, which honestly probably should have gotten a nomination over, say, Sam Rockwell, would be Russell Hornsby for The Hate U Give. Fantastic performance as this father wanting to make sure his kids are strong and independent. Timothée Chalamet in Beautiful Boy, I think everyone thought he'd be in here because he was getting nominated everywhere else, but he gave a very heartbreaking performance as a crystal meth addict. Both Russell Crowe and Joel Edgerton were excellent in Boy Erased, playing these very scary figures. Russell Crowe playing a homophobic pastor father, and Joel Edgerton playing a gay conversion therapy leader. Steve Carell was excellent as Donald Rumsfeld in Vice, and he had way more screen time than Sam Rockwell. Josh Hamilton, he was fantastic as the single dad in 8th grade who isn't written as a joke or a parody. And then Alex Wolff, I honestly thought he gave the best performance in Hereditary. Yes, I think he's even better than Toni Collette, and how his character has to deal with all the stuff in that movie just made him a standout. Best Supporting Actress. I love a lot of these nominees here. Amy Adams, she was really good in Vice, and I'd say, yes, she warrants the nomination, but I wouldn't say she's good enough to win. I know she's on her 6th nomination, and some might consider her overdue, but I think she still has time to win an Oscar. I think she'll be nominated several more times throughout her life. Marina de Tavira in Roma, talk about a nomination that came out of nowhere because she was not nominated at any precursor awards. And it's very rare to not be nominated at any precursor and then get an Oscar nomination. But that just goes to show how much Oscar voters really love Roma. Because Roma was expected to get many nominations, but it overperformed, actually. But she was fantastic in Roma. Regina King was fantastic in If Beale Street Could Talk. Finally getting some love after being snubbed by the Screen Actors Guild Awards and the BAFTAs. She doesn't give the scenery-chewing performance that sometimes wins awards. Not that those are bad. Many of them are very good. Hers is more quiet and subtle, but when it's powerful, it's very powerful. And then Emma Stone and Rachel Weisz, both amazing in The Favorite. They're both amazing in how they try to manipulate Olivia Colman's Queen Anne and how they try to become more dominant over each other. Personally, out of those two, I think Emma Stone was a little bit better than Rachel Weisz, but they're both deserving of their nominations here. As for snubs, who I would have loved to have seen gotten in, although I don't really know who I'd take out to replace them with. I just want to give a shout out to the following women, though. Cynthia Erivo in Bad Times at the El Royale. She was the standout of that cast, and to stand out amongst people like Jon Hamm, Jeff Bridges, and Chris Hemsworth, that's a very tall order to do, but she was magnificent. And I can't wait to see her as Harriet Tubman later this year in the movie Harriet. Nicole Kidman in Boy Erased, I thought she was fantastic. Millicent Simmons, I thought she was the best performance of all the characters in A Quiet Place. I know Emily Blunt was getting recognition in the supporting actress category in some awards. partly so she could also campaign as lead for Mary Poppins Returns. But I personally think Emily Blunt's more of a lead for A Quiet Place, and Millicent Simmons is the true supporting actress. But Millicent Simmons, she was fantastic, and her character probably has the biggest story arc in A Quiet Place, without giving away spoilers, and how she deals with all the things is just fantastic. She has amazing range for a young actress, and I hope she gets more roles in the future because I can't wait to see what she does. And then also another young performer, Thomasin McKenzie in Leave No Trace. I believe this was her film debut, but it looks like she was a seasoned pro, and she's, I believe, from New Zealand, but her American accent was flawless. And then for Best Actor, Christian Bale, amazing in Vice. He truly was Dick Cheney. Bradley Cooper, his greatest performance to date of his career in A Star Is Born, and I honestly think he might be the best male lead out of all the versions of A Star Is Born. Willem Dafoe in At Eternity's Gate, I'm so glad he's in here. He hadn't been getting enough recognition. He got like Golden Globe and Critics' Choice nominations, but not Screen Actors Guild or BAFTA. But I'm so glad he's in here. His performance in At Eternity's Gate is a very emotional and heartbreaking performance to watch, and he's just magnificent. He might be too old to be playing Vincent Van Gogh, but in this case I'll give the age difference a pass because how he just came off as Vincent Van Gogh was just magnificent. And like I said before about Bohemian Rhapsody, while I didn't love it to make it among the absolute best films of the year, I will say Rami Malek is fantastic and deserving of a nomination as Freddie Mercury. While I don't think he should win, like he has been at all the other award shows, he is still worthy of the nomination. And Viggo Mortensen was really good in Green Book, although I wouldn't say he was among the best male lead performances of last year. As for shout-outs of those who were snubbed, I got a lot of them. Ethan Hawke should have been in here for First Reformed easily. I haven't seen a performance in a long time that got so much critical recognition in terms of winning Critics' Circle Awards, only for the industry to practically ignore it. He only got a Critics' Choice nomination, and I'm very baffled by that. Because Ethan Hawke, he gave, in my opinion, what might be one of, if not his best performances of his whole career in First Reformed as this troubled priest, and what he does throughout the film is quite a journey. And apart from the ending, which I didn't like, you're curious to see what he does throughout the whole film. John David Washington was also excellent in BlacKkKlansman. It would have been nice to have seen him nominated alongside Adam Driver, considering how much their characters interact together, and some other people who probably weren't going to get nominated anyway because they hardly had gotten nominations anywhere else, but still they deserve a shout out for being fantastic, are Lakeith Stanfield for Sorry to Bother You, Lucas Hedges for Boy Erased, John Cho for Searching, Billy Howell for On Chesil Beach, and Ben Foster for Leave No Trace. And before we move on to Best Actress, I realize I completely, totally forgot to talk about my big snub in Best Documentary Feature. And that, of course, is Won't You Be My Neighbor? How in the hell does this get snubbed for Best Documentary Feature? It was one of the most critically acclaimed movies of last year. It grossed over $20 million, which for a documentary is huge. It was in my best films list of 2018. I went to see it in the theater with a packed audience, and the entire audience, including me, was crying when it was over. Because it moved us that much, and it's a brilliant portrait of Fred Rogers and the legacy of him and his show. And whether it be interviews or the animation sequences or archival footage from his show, everything about that documentary worked, and it practically swept through all the critics' awards. So how in the hell did it miss the mark here? I seriously will never understand it. And it's now easily among my top 5 worst Oscar snubs of this decade. Ugh. Alright, so I got that over with, because if I go on and on, this video will just be a lot longer than it already is. So back to the actual categories, moving on to Best Actress. I really love Yalitza Aparicio in Roma for an actress in a film debut. She's fantastic. Glenn Close, she's really great in The Wife. I know a lot of people think she's going to win because she's never won before, and this is her 7th nomination. And I know a lot of people would love to see her win. I won't be mad if she wins, but I think other actresses are a little more deserving than her this year. Olivia Colman fantastic in The Favorite. Lady Gaga, amazing in A Star is Born, and in my opinion, she had the best performance out of all 20 acting nominees for this year's Oscars. And this is coming from someone who, as I've said before, has never been the biggest fan of her music in the past and was very hesitant when I learned she'd been cast. But here, of course, she doesn't move into her Lady Gaga persona. Yeah, she sings and yeah, she plays a musician, but she doesn't do any of her Lady Gaga shtick that she's done kind of in her other roles on like American Horror Story and things like that. And then Melissa McCarthy, also fantastic in Can You Ever Forgive Me, and I think this is her best performance of her career, and of course she goes a full 180, she de-glams herself, she plays a real person, she goes dramatic for a change instead of comedic, and it works really well. And like I said with Richard E. Grant, Melissa McCarthy and him have fantastic chemistry together, considering the fact that their characters aren't very nice people. And as for snubs, I do wish Emily Blunt had gotten in here for Mary Poppins Returns. Was she as good as Julie Andrews? No, but frankly, I don't think any actress could truly match what Julie Andrews did in the original, but she comes pretty close. And then Elsie Fisher in 8th Grade, she gave an amazing performance in an amazing coming-of-age film, and it felt like a very realistic performance of a teenager and not a Hollywoodized version of a teenager. Viola Davis was incredible in Widows, and she's one of my favorite actresses working today. And I know a lot of people would have liked to have seen Toni Collette nominated here for Hereditary, and I wouldn't have minded if she were nominated here, although there were one or two moments in her performance where I think she went a little over the top, which is why I never necessarily wanted her to win. Saoirse Ronan was also fantastic in On Chesil Beach. She's one of the best young actresses working today. And then Amandla Stenberg was also fantastic in The Hate U Give, which, as I said before, is one of the best young adult movies I've ever seen. And then moving on to Best Director. So happy to see Spike Lee in here, given that BlacKkKlansman was my favorite movie of last year. And believe it or not, this is his first nomination for directing ever. He has gotten nominations in the past for writing, and he did get a documentary nomination once, but he's never gotten a directing nomination until now. He did receive an honorary Oscar of Lifetime Achievement a couple years ago, but this is his first competitive director nomination, and who knows, maybe his nomination here or BlacKkKlansman as a film will be kind of like what The Departed was for Martin Scorsese, finally winning him an Oscar, although I think Alfonso Cuarón probably has the lock in the directing category, but at least maybe Spike Lee will win for writing. I'm just at least glad to see him here, though. Powell Pawlikowski for Cold War. Cold War was good, but I don't think his directing was up to par with being nominated here. Yorgos Lanthimos, really amazing job he did with The Favorite, especially since I liked but didn't love his last few films like The Lobster and The Killing of a Sacred Deer. But here he really stepped up and it was just magnificent. Alfonso Cuarón for Roma, of course, and well-deserved. Adam McKay in Vice, he's good but not great. You know, like everyone else has been saying for snubs, where is Bradley Cooper for A Star is Born? I mean, a lot of actors turned directors have gotten nominations in the past for their film debut, like Robert Redford for Ordinary People, or Kevin Costner for Dances with Wolves, you know, etc., etc. And honestly, I think A Star is Born may be even better than those films, and I like those films a lot, but here with A Star is Born, Bradley Cooper looked like he'd been a pro for 20 years. Also some big snubs. Damien Chazelle for First Man. It's a shame that all the controversies, and I say that with kind of like a sarcastic vibe because there really isn't any controversy to behold about how involving the brouhaha over the planting of the flag on the moon and it not being as thrilling as Apollo 13 or Gravity like some people complained. That's just all nonsense. But Damien Chazelle, he did a fantastic job with First Man, and I wish he'd been getting more recognition. John Krasinski also deserved a lot of props for A Quiet Place. I haven't seen his other films he directed, but here it was just magnificent. George Tillman Jr., great job with The Hate U Give. Marielle Heller, Can You Ever Forgive Me? Chloe Zhao, The Rider, amazing job she did in particular, given the fact that she was working with non-actors in the lead roles. Bo Burnham, he did an amazing job with 8th Grade, and that's also his film debut. and then Julian Schnabel for At Eternity's Gate. Any one of those two, in my opinion, would have been better than Powell Polakowski or Adam McKay. I guess my top 3 picks, Bradley Cooper definitely should have been in there for sure. And then the last spot should have gone to either Damien Chazelle or John Krasinski. And I honestly don't know who I'd pick between those two, because what they both did with those films is just amazing. And had either one of them gotten in along with Bradley Cooper, I would have been fine with that. And then finally, Best Picture. I like several of the contenders here. BlacKkKlansman, I obviously love being in here. The Favorite, I love that being in here. Roma, absolutely, that deserves to be in here. A Star is Born, absolutely, that deserves to be in here. Black Panther, I like that movie a lot, but I wouldn't say it's among the absolute best movies of last year. Bohemian Rhapsody, it's a good film, but not great. Certainly not deserving of a Best Picture nomination. I realize it made a lot of money, and I'm not saying its money is the reason why it's in here, but obviously Hollywood has liked it a lot better than the critics have, because they do like musical biopics, and of course Queen is one of the most iconic bands of all time. Green Book, a good film, but not necessarily great. I wouldn't say it deserves to be in here. Same with Vice, good but not great. As for films that I wish could have been in here, 8th Grade I think would have been worthy of a nomination. Won't You Be My Neighbor, even though that's a documentary, that would have been worthy of a nomination. Same with RBG. A Quiet Place would have been a deserving nomination, and it's rare for horror films to get nominated here, and admittedly many of them don't deserve a Best Picture nomination, but this is one of the few that did. First Man, that really deserved a Best Picture nomination. The Hate U Give, I wish that had been getting more awards love, and that's one of those rare young adult films that should have been a solid, legitimate awards contender. Can You Ever Forgive Me, The Rider, Leave No Trace, those all would have been solid contenders. I realize a lot of these films are films from my own best of list, but of course, since it's my own opinion here on these nominations, they are the films I feel should have gotten the most recognition. Also, If Beale Street Could Talk, that would have been a worthy Best Picture nominee, as well as a worthy Best Director nominee, too, for Barry Jenkins. Yeah. So overall, though, I like these nominations for the most part. You know, the Oscar nominations usually make me satisfied for the most part every year. But, of course, like every year, there's always going to be the head-scratching snubs, and this year in particular, the Won't You Be My Neighbor snub is really going to be baffling for not just me, but almost every awards watcher for decades to come, because literally everybody was predicting that documentary to not only get nominated, but win. And the fact that it's not even here, it's just something I'll never understand, ever. But for the most part, you know, these are solid nominations, and a lot of them are from my best films of last year, and a lot of them are, for the most part, deserving of the fields they're nominated in. So there's not too much I can complain about here. As for the winners, we'll see what happens when the Oscars take place, but I will absolutely come back with a video about the winners, as well as the ceremony itself, and all the craziness that has been going on leading up to it. Because this has certainly been a very eventful ceremony for one that hasn't even happened yet. Alright, so those are my overall thoughts on this year's Oscar nominations. Please let me know in the comment section below what you think of the nominations. What do you like? What do you not like? What do you think got snubbed? Also, if you've not subscribed to my channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell so you can get all my new videos as soon as they're uploaded. And I will see you guys next time with my winner videos for the BAFTAs, the Razzies, and of course the Oscars. So until then, see you guys later. Bye.